Logic and research methods. Arab philosophers paid great attention to logic. Because of the honor of this topic on the one hand, and because it is a tool of philosophy on the other hand. We have seen before how theology is distinguished from philosophy, considering the method followed by each of them. Logic is the method of philosophers, and dialectic is the method of theologians. We cannot expect significant progress from Arab philosophers in the study of this science. Because Aristotle, the owner of logic, did not leave to those who came after him except a small amount. As for the general principles of logic and the arrangement of its topics, Arab philosophers followed the example of the first teacher, step by step, and book by book, from what Aristotle left to us. We mentioned these books previously when talking about the era of translation. So what is new in logic that Islamic philosophers have added? What's new in the format? This knowledge emerged completely, as we find it in a book compiled in the 6th century AH, Al-Basair al-Nuzayriya, written by Zayn al-Din Omar bin Salman al-Sawi. Sheikh Muhammad Abdo was so impressed by this book that he devoted himself to editing, publishing, and teaching it. On the other hand, there are chapters that philosophers have researched deeply and delved into their problems, and perhaps Ibn Sina's Logic of Healing is one of the best examples of these profound logical discussions. On the third hand, the Arab philosophers' preoccupation with the sciences and their adoption of experimental methods suitable for research into nature reflected this experimental trend in logic, so they expanded the field of induction. Since logic, as we mentioned, is the tool of philosophy, and its weapon with which it defends itself from its basin, and with which it attacks its opponents, and this weapon may be directed in particular against religion, Muslim jurists considered logic to be the cause of the defect occurring in philosophy, and that it is the cause of man's deviation from the path of the right path and the straight path, by which they mean the path of religion. Hence, fatwas were issued prohibiting engaging in logic, and it was said, whoever uses logic has become a heretic. For this reason, there were two opposing currents in the history of Islamic thought, one of them adopting Aristotelian logic, and from this current, philosophy and the various sciences, whether mathematical and natural, emerged. The other current denies this logic and refers only to the Quranic method and the Sunnah of the Messenger, and this is the method of the predecessors, from Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, to Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote books bearing this title in response to Greek logic. His student, and those who followed in his footsteps later, followed this path. As for the science of theology, since the 6th century AH, it has synthesized logic and introduced it as an introduction to pave the way for the study of Islamic beliefs, as we see in the book, Al-Mawaqif, by Al-Iji. Then, what is the logic? Is it scientific rules that, if one follows them, one will achieve what is right and avoid error, or are they laws of the human mind? In other words, is logic a science or an art? The answer of Muslim philosophers, due to the guidance of Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina after him, is that logic is an art and not a science. Al-Farabi says in Statistics of Sciences, the creation of logic gives a set of laws that will straighten the mind and direct man towards the right path, etc. Ibn Sina says in Al-Isharat, what is meant by logic is for a person to have a legal instrument whose observance protects him from going astray in his thoughts. Logic is not a science, as the Stoics said, but it is a machine, or organon, as Aristotle's commentators said. It is the tool by which both theoretical and practical sciences are tested. There is a close connection between logic and language, because the words we use are the container of thought, and the words must be specific and clear so that there is no confusion in thinking, which leads to fallacy. Words are not intended for themselves, and Ibn Sina investigated this connection and decided, if logic could be learned with a naive idea in which only meanings are observed, that would be sufficient. If it were possible for the interlocutor to find out what is in his mind by another trick, he would have no need to speak at all. Thus, Sheikh Ul-Ray became aware of the possibility of the existence of a symbolic logic in which he did not pay attention to the word. Logic is basically a mental science, and its issues focus only on their mental existence, not on their existence outside the mind, that is, to imagine them, or as Ibn Sina says in Al-Madkhal, p. It is inevitably unknown in relation to the mind, and likewise it is only known in relation to it. But Ibn Sina, in his later books, recognized another type of issues, which are existential issues that do not derive the relationship between their subject and predicate from the mind itself, but from looking at the external thing and taking into account its changing conditions. Logic is arranging known issues in order to extract an unknown result from them. This arrangement may be an analogy or it may be a proof. The Arabs paid great attention to analogy, and they ended up reducing all thinking to standard forms, so that the results are necessarily derived from their premises. In their early days, their philosophers directed their attention to acquiring premises that were suitable for proof. We have seen how historians belittled Al-Kindi's status, because he did not improve the making of proof. However, when Ibn Sina sets out the theory of proof, he refers it to analogy, and says that it is a certain analogy composed of certainties to produce certainty. The analogy that establishes certainty is proof. There are many types of introductions to analogy, including the tangible, the experienced, the imaginative, the frequent, the imaginary, the well-known, the accepted, the presumed, the axioms, and the first. But the principles of proof must meet two conditions. It must be universal and necessary, that is, true in every time and place, and this is only present in the first, the tangible, the experienced, and the frequent. Proof is a means of reasoning in science, through which the issues of science are examined, and the curtain of errors in them is revealed. Experience cannot, in the view of Arab logicians, rise to the status of certain proof, because it is focused on some particulars and is often filled with errors. Likewise, induction does not rise to the level of certainty, and everything it reaches is a strong and prevailing suspicion, unless it is complete induction, in which case it is similar to analogy. There is no dispute that the mathematical sciences are more reliable than the natural sciences, because mathematical premises in arithmetic, engineering, physical sciences, and others depend on intuitive first principles such as the axiom of equality, and the axiom of the whole is greater than the part. Al-Ghazali, in The Savior, exalted the importance of mathematics, saying that it is a demonstrative science with no way to struggle with it after understanding it, but there is no dispute that whoever looks into it is amazed at its subtleties and the appearance of its proofs, and because of that his belief in philosophers improves. We know that logic is closely related to mathematics, as Bertrand Russell recently made clear in his Logic that united it with mathematics. But the Arab philosophers who relied on research in nature and in the life sciences and Ibn Sina actually laid down, in the beginning of his book, The Law, 7 rules for experimentation, preceded by John Stuart Mill by centuries, when he said, medicines know their powers in two ways: the method of measurement and the path of experiment. In this last path, several conditions must be taken into account, the first of which is, the medicine must be free from any acquired condition and occasional heat or cold. The second is that the person on whom the illness was tested was a single illness. If it is a complex illness, and it involves two contradictory therapeutic matters, and the medicine was tried on them and it worked, then we do not know the secret behind that in reality. The third is to try the drug on the opposite. The fourth is that the strength in the medicine is equivalent to its equal strength for the illness, and the fifth is that the time during which its effect or action appears. The sixth is to ensure that his action continues at all times or at most. The seventh is that the experiment be on the human body. This scientific method, which was the reason for the prosperity of science among the Arabs, is what European philosophers sought, starting from the 12th century, because Europe, in Latin, sought to transfer science from the Arabs, and its transfer to philosophy was incidental. This is, as we remember, what the Arabs did at the beginning of the era of translation when they transmitted sciences first and foremost, then this was followed by the transmission of philosophy. As for the approach of the human sciences, which includes religion, ethics, and politics, Arab philosophers added to Aristotle's approach, which he expounded in the book, Controversy, the method of repetition, that is, the recurrence of testimonies narrated from so-and-so, which is a purely Islamic approach characterized by criticism of men and trust in the person to whom it is narrated. About him. We know that the Sunnah of the Messenger depends on this approach, but philosophers applied this approach to history, and they had an opinion about the validity of historical facts that differed from the approach of the Sunnis. This is because the basis for the validity of a historical fact is not the abundance or number of testimonies, but rather the certainty with which doubt disappears, such as the belief in the existence of Galen and Euclid. 1 and others. This approach did not achieve its goal except at the hands of Ibn Khaldun, the owner of the historical approach. As for the approach to ethics and society, it relies on well-known matters, such as that injustice is evil, protecting one's neighbor is good, and other moral issues that are common in nations, and it is relied upon in building virtues. Such issues are not certain, but they are well known. In the book, The Controversy, which is the sixth part of Al-Shifa, Ibn Sina discussed the well-known matters at length, and mentioned among the reasons for the issues that spread among the people and become famous, as follows: among the well-known matters are those whose fame is due to the public interest being attached to them, and the consensus of the religious sects on them. Their predecessors have seen it, to the point that it remains among the people without being based on anyone, and it becomes an unwritten law, and is taught and disciplined, like their saying, justice must be done, and lying must not be done, too. If we wanted to translate these words into modern language, we would say that it is custom, and custom is a source of morality that resembles certainty, but it is not certainty. In summary, proof is useful in the mathematical and natural sciences, because its premises are, according to nature and the breath of truth. As for the dialectical analogy, its premises are human, researching the affairs of society and benefiting the rulers, administrators of the state, and teachers. Its premises are not according to nature and the breath of truth, but rather according to the originator or originators. Truth is viewed in itself, and fame is viewed in terms of acquaintance to deliver it. Among the well-known, what is well-known and praiseworthy among philosophers and sages. God. When they investigated God and his attributes, the Arab philosophers had no need to take into account the absolute oneness that Islam brought. God is in the Quran, as stated in Al-Samadaniyya. Say, He is God, God, the Eternal, He begets not, nor is He begotten, and there is no one equal to Him. Sincerity. Although there are attributes that indicate resemblance, such as the verses of the Istiwa and the hand, God is nothing like Him, and He is the transcendent, that is, He is higher and higher than all other beings. Philosophers inherited from the Greeks two theories regarding God. The first is Aristotle's theory, that God is the mover that does not move, that is, it is the primary cause of the world's movement. Related to this theory is that it exists, because Aristotle's metaphysics is existence, and according to his definition, it is the search for what exists insofar as it exists, and the most honorable of all existence, the absolute existence, which is God. God exists according to Aristotle, but this attribute, or this term, is not one of the beautiful names of God mentioned in the Quran. We know that many Islamic thinkers refuse to deviate from the Quranic text. They did not give God anything other than the names that came in the book, and they refuse to call Him what we give to tangible things when we divide them into two parts: self and attributes. The second theory is the theory of Plotinus and Neoplatonism, which made God the One, and from the One flowed the first mind, then the universal soul, and then the cytoplasm. The One and the First are two of the beautiful names of God. But the metaphysics of the One differs in its foundation, as we mentioned before, from the metaphysics of existence that Aristotle called for. Al-Kindi was confused between these two types of philosophy, and was unable to reconcile them. He was more inclined to the Islamic theory, Aristotle's theory that the world is ancient, which leads to the denial of creation, and God only moved the world with the first movement, so He is the mover that does not move. Plotinus's theory says of overflow, that is, the world necessarily came from God, just as light comes from the sun or water from a spring. Therefore, God has no credit in creation. The theory of Islam separates God from the world, and basically calls for creation ex nihilo, meaning that the world did not exist, and then it came into existence by the command of God, according to the Almighty's saying. His command, when He wanted something, was only for Him to say to it, "Be, and it will be." Yasin 82, and therefore all theologians say, God is the Creator. Al-Kindi had a position on this issue that differed from Al-Farabi, and Al-Farabi's position differed from the position of Ibn Sina, just as Ibn Rushd's position differed from the position of his predecessors. The summary of Al-Kindi's theory is that God is the true One, and everything we say is one, whether it is the mathematical one, or the natural thing that we describe as one, is one metaphorically. As for the true One, it is the One, in essence, who is not multiplied at all in any direction, and is not divided into any species, neither in terms of itself, nor in terms of another, nor space nor time, nor carrier, nor predicate, nor whole nor part. 4. As for God's connection to the world, it is the connection of creativity, which is a characteristic similar to creation. However, the meaning of creativity indicates more than creation. Creativity is more closely related to the meaning of creation than non-existence, and it also indicates management and order. In this regard, Al-Kindi concludes his book by saying, the true One, then, is the first, the Creator, and the holder of all that He created. Nothing is devoid of His hold and power except that it returns and is destroyed. Thus, we see that Al-Kindi relies on the Islamic theory in saying about oneness and creation from nothing. That is, creativity. Then he described God with the attributes that he transmitted from the philosophers, such that He is not a genus, nor a species, nor a carrier or a carrier, and other than that, which are negative attributes. If we turn to Al-Farabi, we see that he was the first to reconcile Aristotle with Neoplatonism, between the philosophy of existence and the philosophy of the One, so for him God was the first existent. By the first, he means the first principle of all existence, and the first reason for their existence. He opens his book, The Opinions of the People of the Utopia, by saying, the first existent is the first cause of the existence of all other existence. He says in the book, Attaining Happiness, in the science of metaphysics, we should take the path of looking at existing beings to search for their cause. How do they exist? Why does it exist? Who is the agent of its existence? And so on, until the examiner concludes with an existent that cannot have an originating principle, rather, it is the first principle of all existence. Al-Farabi then goes on to describe God as innocent of all imperfections. And he is eternally existing in his essence, and he is the existent that cannot have a cause through him, or from him, or his existence, and he is distinct in his essence from everything else, without a partner or an opponent. We would like to note that Al-Farabi's application of the attribute, substance, to God was not approved by Ibn Sina later, and Al-Kindi did not accept it before. Al-Farabi does not limit his descriptions of God to negative descriptions only, but rather describes him with affirmative descriptions, and in that he says, the names by which the first should be called are the names that indicate in the existing beings that we have, and then in the best of them with us, they indicate perfection and the virtue of existence. 5. He starts from the descriptions that people have, but he attributes absoluteness and transcendence to them, and that they belong to him alone in his essence, such as that he is a single, living, perfect, just, and powerful entity. As for Ibn Sina, he took another path. Although he relied largely on Aristotle and Al-Farabi, he was unique in several matters. The Sheikh is an existent philosopher. He follows Aristotle in his definition of metaphysics as the knowledge of what exists insofar as it exists. The first necessary existent is God, and Ibn Sina may suffice with saying about God that he is the necessary one, while Al-Farabi prefers to describe him by saying, the first. The difference between them lies in that the second teacher looks at God from the point of view that he is the first principle, and that the main sheikh looks at him from the point of view that he is necessary to exist. God exists, but how do we define or identify what exists? Ibn Sina does not provide any definition, but rather mentions that the meaning of existent is one of the self-evident meanings, and in this regard he says in The Divinities of Healing, the existing, the thing, and the necessary, their meanings are initially established in the soul, and that identification is not something that needs to be brought about with things I know of. This is naive realism, because proving the existence of existent is the demand of philosophy, so saying that it is self-evident and does not require proof is an invalidation of philosophical consideration. In any case, we are concerned with focusing on the meaning of what is necessary or obligatory. Ibn Sina divided the existent thing logically. It is either obligatory, possible, or impossible. These three are difficult to define accurately, because whoever wants to define what is necessary takes into account what is possible or what is impossible. Then he says, what is not necessary or what is non-existent, or what cannot be imposed as something non-existent, or what if imposed other than what it is, would be impossible. Whoever wants to define the possible takes into account its necessary or impossible definition. This concludes that the meaning of duty is one of the Possible things are the beings in the sensory world that need a material, formal, effective and final cause for their existence. Every possible thing for existence needs another cause for its existence. But we cannot sequence the causes to infinity, and we must stop at a first cause that has no cause, which is the existent, that must exist by itself. This proof in the sequence of causes is Aristotelian. Causes are finite and end at a first cause, which is the cause of causes, and is not a cause of anything else. It is the absolute cause and the complete cause. All existence exists for its sake, and it does not exist for the sake of anything. One of the names of the first cause is that it is the first principle, as Al-Farabi did before, and there is nothing new in this argument because it is taken from Aristotle. Ibn Sina affirms that the necessary existent has positive attributes, the most important of which is that it is one. Then he goes on to describe it with negative attributes, that it has no essence, no kind, no separation, no quality, no quantity, no where, no when, no equal, no partner, and no against him. Necessary existence is complete existence, even beyond completeness. It is pure good, because existence is good. It is also true when the belief in its existence is sincere, so there is no more truth in this way than the belief in its existence is sincere. The necessary existence is pure reason, because it is a paradox of matter in every respect. Likewise, he is purely intelligible, and his essence is intellect and rational is intelligible. He understands everything in a comprehensive way, and yet nothing personal escapes him, and not the weight of an atom in the heavens or on earth escapes him. This is one of the wonders whose conception requires the gentleness of a gentleman. 6. In Al-Isharat, the Sheikh has an intuitive path that is compatible with his illuminating philosophy, and differs from the demonstrative path mentioned in Divinity and Salvation. This path is contemplating existence itself without consideration of the conditions of creatures, and in that he says, consider how our explanation of the immutability of the first and its oneness did not require contemplation of anything other than the essence of existence, and did not require consideration of those who created it, even if that was evidence of it. But this door is more reliable and honorable. That is, if we consider the state of existence, then existence bears witness to it insofar as it is existence, and after that it bears witness to all that comes after it in existence. It is natural for Ibn Rushd to take another approach in proving the existence of God, because he is more loyal to the Persians. It is no surprise that he is one of the most famous commentators. However, he expresses his own point of view that differs from other previous commentators. From the likes of Alexander and Themistius, this is the path of philosophy. He has another path in which he follows the path of religion. The summary of what Ibn Rushd concludes from the philosophical path is that God is the mover who does not move, and that he is the ultimate mover after whom there is no mover. The conclusion of his opinion, according to the legal path, is that God is a creator. This is because in the first way he looks at the world and the tangible entities in it, which are the tangible essences, and looks at their principles, while in the second way he looks at the beings and sees that they are created, and that they are compatible with man, and these are the two pieces of evidence that he called the evidence of invention and the evidence of providence. In his book, Summary of Post-Nature, he examines existence, essence, and the One. Unlike Sheikh al-Razi, existent is not considered one of the intuitive meanings, but it is said in three ways: 1. For each of the 10 categories. 2. On the truthful, which is what is in the mind as it is outside the mind. 3. And on the essence of everything that has an essence and a self outside the self, whether that self is conceived or not. The most famous meanings are the last two, that is, existent, can either be applied to the entity or to the truthful one. God exists in the sense that he is an entity outside ourselves, in the sense that he has a reality, and our perception of him in our minds is consistent with this reality. We return to the tangible, existent. It is the most famous thing called existent. It has 4 reasons for its existence: material, formal, active, and teleological. This tangible, existent, is like a tree, this book, and so on. It is called, in Aristotle's term, first essence. Then from the partial, tangible, existent, the mind conceives a comprehensive meaning, like our saying of the tree and the book. Universalities are the second essence. The tangible, existent, is sufficient in its existence by itself, and has no cause outside of it. Summing up a long discussion on this topic, Ibn Rushd says, rather, the partial form and the partial matter are the only 2 reasons for the existence of the substance referred to, and that the person is acted upon by another person of the same type or resemblance to him. In other words, that is, this tree is sufficient in its own existence, and that the one who created it is another tree similar in kind to it, and so on. But we cannot go on indefinitely in the series of active movers or causes. Rather, we must end with a first mover that does not move at all, nor is it likely to move, either by nature or by accident. If so, this drive is eternally necessary. 7. The previous evidence is natural and metaphysical evidence, but Ibn Rushd presents another evidence that he considers psychological. Because it relies on the principles established in psychology, and it cites what was said in the divine laws, know yourself and you will know your Creator. 8. This is because images have 2 existences, a tangible existence, and a reasonable existence, in terms of its being stripped of the cytoplasm. These are the paradoxical minds that move the world. Is the world ancient or modern? How was this world created? What is it made of? These are the main issues investigated by theologians. Philosophers inherited from the Greeks the belief in the ancientness of the world, which is an explicit statement according to Aristotle, and less explicit according to Plato and Plotinus. This is because the world according to Plato is also ancient, except that God organized it, even though in other places in his dialogues he speaks of the Maker who contemplated the eternal ideals and made the world according to the example of these ideals. As for Plotinus, he had no creation, because his theory is emanation or emanation, which ends with a kind of unity of existence. All of these theories are opposed to Islam, which explicitly states that God is distinct from the world and transcends it, and that He Almighty created it after it had not existed, and that He, glory be to Him, is able to change creation other than creation, and to bring it back a second time. Muslim philosophers took different positions on these theories. Some of them follow the Islamic theory and say of creation, and that the world is neither ancient nor eternal. Others believed in the ancientness of the world, but tried to explain ancientness in a way that was not inconsistent with God's ability to create, and a third group went to the sequence of beings from God through the path of emanation. It seems that Al-Kindi was the only philosopher who opposed the belief in the antiquity of the world, on the basis of mathematical consideration of the universe and proof that it is finite. If it is finite, then it is not eternal, and he has many messages regarding the finitude of matter other than his message to Al-Mutazim Billah. The crime is final, and so is the crime of all, that is, the whole world, because the body has a type and types, it cannot therefore be eternal. As for the eternal, it has no gender, so the body is not the eternal. The eternal is the term of philosophers that corresponds to the ancient among theologians. What is meant by the eternal is that what exists has no beginning, and the eternal may be applied to that which has neither a beginning nor an end. For this reason, he began to prove that everything in this world, whether matter, space, time, or movement, has an end, and if it is finite, it has a beginning. That is, it has a beginning and an end. For this reason, he began to evaluate the evidence to deny infinity, which is mostly mathematical evidence. One of them is to assume that the infinite exists, and let us take a part and the remainder becomes either finite in size or infinite in size. Then we subtract this finite part that we took from the infinite, and if the remainder is finite, the resultant was finite, even if the remainder was infinite, and we added to it what we took, the total was greater, and this is a mistake. It follows from this that the eternal alone is God, and that the world is not eternal. As for creation, Al-Kindi describes it as creativity. God is the powerful creator and holder of all that he has created. However, this process was not explained to us by Al-Kindi, and it is most likely that none of the philosophers, whether ancient or modern, were able to explain it sufficiently. Because it is a process that transcends the natural level, and rises to the unknowns of metaphysics. If we turn to Al-Farabi, we see that he explains the existence of the world through the first, following the theory of emanation. He declares this using this very term, and the first that precedes the first is the first of the last, because only one can emanate from one. Thus the second issues from the first, then from the third the second, and so on to the 10th mind. Al-Farabi says, the first is the one from whom it was created, and when the existence that is due to the first is created, it is necessary that all other existence exist by him, and the existence of what he exists by him is only in the sense that his existence is superfluous to the existence of something else. 10 Then he says, the existence of the second overflows from the first. This second is also a substance that is not originally incorporeal, nor is it in matter. He intellects himself and intellects the first, for what he intelligibles from the first, the existence of a third is required. 11 It proceeds in this way to the mind that moves the lunar orbit, then the mind that pertains to the world beneath the moon's orbit, which is the terrestrial world, and in this terrestrial world we find the 4 stages, that is, the elements, which are fire, air, water, and earth. From it there are natural mineral objects such as stones, minerals, plants, non-speaking animals, and speaking animals. The active mind, or the 10th mind, which is the last of the minds that emerged from the first in that sequence that we mentioned, is the ruler of the earthly world, and with which man is connected, and through this connection Al-Farabi explains many matters from the core of the theory of knowledge and religion, such as the theory of revelation. But the statement of abundance inevitably leads to a kind of unity of existence, and contradicts the statement of creation from nothing, and subjects God to necessity, so the creation of the world does not occur through will, but rather through necessary abundance. For this reason, Muslims rejected it. The world is divided into 2 parts, as is the case with Aristotle, the world of heaven, and the world of earth. That is, the whole world is a huge ball with the earth as its center and what surrounds it up to the orbit of the moon, and here the terrestrial world ends. As for what is above the sphere of the moon to the first sphere of heaven, it is the world of heaven. This is how the ancients understood astronomy. We return to the process of creation, and we say, the first emanated from the second, and it is an intellect. It is the first intellect, but the second performs 2 operations, which are that it intellects itself, so the existence of the third is necessary for it. That is, the mind. Since he is immanent in his essence, the existence of the first heaven is required of him. The third has 2 things to say about it, the 4th mind when it understands itself, and the sphere of the fixed planets, because it is intrinsic to itself, then the dual flux proceeds in this way. There is Saturn, then Jupiter, then Mars, then the Sun, then Venus, then Mercury, then the Moon. And here the existence of heavenly bodies ends. The objects are arranged in order of best, and the best is arranged in descending order. The first is the best and most honorable, and nothing equals it in its virtue, perfection, and honor, then the second, and so on. Likewise, the first sky is better than the sphere of fixed planets, and this is better than the sphere of Saturn, until we reach the last celestial body, which is the Moon. As for the terrestrial world, it is formed after the emergence of the four elements, i.e., the four elements, from their differences and mixing, so that many contradictory types of bodies occur. This is the natural philosophy that prevailed from the Greeks to the Arabs. Ibn Sina does not differ from Al-Farabi in saying about origins, their method, and the creation of the world, except in some details. We have seen that Al-Farabi goes to two types of intellect from which another intellect and the astronomical sphere emerge. An example of this is that the third intellect itself, and the fourth intellect emanates from it, and from its essence in itself, the sphere of the fixed stars emerges. As for Ibn Sina, for him the process of overflow, by which he explains multiplicity, is triple, not dual. In fact, the problem of explaining the existence we say, this is among the opinions of philosophers, even Ibn Rushd, about the world. They based it on the natural world that was common in their time, but starting from the 16th century, this science began to change fundamentally. Through Copernicus and Galileo, astronomy became something other than ancient astronomy, and astronomical investigations are still advancing in this era with the invention of the telescope and other precise instruments, and with the launching of spaceships. Likewise, the science of nature, after the atom was split up and the secret of its composition was known, underwent a great revolution. The same can be said about the science of life and its branches. The elements are no longer four: fire, air, water, and earth, as was thought. For this reason, the philosophy that was built on these sciences, and which envisioned the world in a special way, no longer has room in the present era, and Islamic philosophy must be newly established on the edifice of modern science, taking into account the tremendous progress that science has achieved with its modern methods. We must bear in mind that Kant, the philosopher, considered the issue of the antiquity of the world and was unable to reach an opinion on it. Evidence of antiquity is equivalent to evidence of occurrence, as well as evidence of the immortality of the soul. For this reason, the investigation into the antiquity of the world and the immortality of the soul is taken outside the scope of rational knowledge, to another type of practical knowledge that we must fully acknowledge. Human. Man is a body and a soul, and he must fulfill both the demands of the body and the soul, so that a healthy life will be possible for him in this life. The Greek philosophy inherited from Plato and Aristotle was concerned with paying more attention to the soul than to the body. Because the reality of man, according to them, is that he is a rational, thinking, speaking animal. What distinguishes him from animals and beasts is this part of the soul, meaning thinking, and reason. Philosophy inherited from the Greeks something else with regard to human philosophy, which is the division of people into two parts: private and public. This division is of course inherent in humans, and there is no way to reconcile people. Special people are those who purify their minds with theoretical sciences and not with practical crafts. In general, raising one's gaze over work is an undoubted fact that prevailed in Greek philosophy, and Arab philosophers took it from them. However, Islam, in its essence, does not distinguish between people except on the basis of piety and righteousness. People are equal like the teeth of a comb, and an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab except through piety. Hence, Islam made room for every student, researcher, thinker, and worker, whether they were nobles, slaves, or loyalists. We often read about jurists who excelled in Islam and were not known for their relative status, prestige, or money, such as Al-Ghazali, Hujjat al-Islam, for example. On the other hand, Islam did not look at man as only his mind, or only at himself, neglecting the body. On the contrary, man is a being composed of a body that has its demands, including desires, which he must fulfill in order for life to be right, and a soul, which he must also fulfill. Therefore, Islam did not prohibit the adornments of life, nor did it forbid food and drink, but it advised moderation and moderation. Did Muslim philosophers, when researching human beings, follow what was stated in the Quran and what was transmitted from the Messenger, or what was translated to them from the Greeks? What really draws attention in this issue is the neglect by Islamic thinkers of the Quranic theory about man. What is he? How should he behave in this life? Greek theories taken from Plato and Aristotle, especially Aristotle in his psychological, moral, and political books, prevailed among them. What is human? It is a talking animal. This Aristotelian answer divides the soul into three parts according to living beings: the plant soul, the animal soul, and the rational soul. The meaning that man is a rational animal is that he is one of the other species included in this genus called animal. We do not have books by Al-Kindi that discuss the soul in a long way, or ethics and politics. Therefore, it is difficult for us to know his opinion. As for Al-Farabi, he took a humanitarian approach in his writings. In The Utopia, he examines man, considering that he comes in the series of beings after heavenly beings. He says what it says, so when a person occurs, the first thing that occurs in him is the force by which he is nourished, which is the nourishing force, and then after that is the force by which he senses the tangible. He then goes on to enumerate the senses such as smell, taste, hearing, and sight, then the imaginary ones, which compound the sensible things with one another. It separates some of them from each other. Then there is the speaking instrument by which a person understands intelligible things, distinguishes between good and bad, and acquires industries and sciences. The basis on which Al-Farabi, and even Ibn Sina, Ibn Bajjah, or Ibn Rushd rely, is the book, The Soul, by Aristotle. 17, which played a major role in the history of Islamic philosophy, and was the major pillar of psychological investigations and the identification of the powers and faculties of the human soul. Indeed, Plato had another view of the human soul, so he divided it into a threefold division on the basis of lust, anger, and reason. The mind controls the passions of desires and the intensity of anger, and this is the main human virtue. However, Arab philosophers mostly followed the path of the first teacher in arranging the psychological powers into nutritious, sensitive, and rational. Whatever the case, Arab philosophers did not innovate anything new in psychology, which must follow a new scientific approach, other than the theoretical approach they followed. They did not have organized experiments on human behavior. Rather, unlike Aristotle, who started experimentally and attached psychology to natural science, they took this science in a philosophical manner. They considered the goals that a person should seek, which are perfecting himself in order to achieve the ultimate happiness. The perfection of a person is to obtain theoretical sciences until he is actually called rational, after having been rational by strength and innate preparation. This achievement is subject to two goals, the beautiful and the beneficial. There is no doubt that the most beautiful and the best are better than the most useful in terms of value. The theory Al-Farabi mentioned in Attainment of Happiness and in Al-Tabifi al-Hada that attainment occurs in two ways, education and discipline. Education leads us to acquire theoretical sciences, while discipline imbues learners with the path of becoming accustomed to practical sciences. Practical virtues have two paths, persuasion and coercion, with rebels who refuse to learn. Thus, if a person achieves the theoretical and practical knowledge he seeks, and prefers the most beautiful and useful, he will achieve perfection and achieve the utmost happiness. But Al-Farabi does not stop at the perfection of the individual human being, or the solitary one in the language of Ibn Bajjah, whose imaginative power reaches the end of perfection, so he accepts as the active mind the present and future particulars, and accepts the imitations of the paradoxical intelligibles, and all other noble beings, but he also states that the human being cannot achieve perfection, for which natural nature was created only by the gathering of a large group of people cooperating, each one doing for each one what he needs in his constitution. That is why human persons have multiplied, and human meetings have occurred from them. 18. The best good and the highest perfection are achieved first in the city, and a person's happiness is achieved according to the city in which he lives, including the virtuous city, the ignorant city, the lost city, and others. This is Plato's theory, which he expounded in the Republic, and which Al-Farabi was closely acquainted with. And Ibn Sina, who began as a peripatetic, and considered man to be a natural body with a form called a soul, which is his first perfection and the sum of his vital functions, and this soul is not something that separates the body, ended with a theory that he defended, which is that man is composed of two essences, namely the body and the soul, and that the essence of the soul is different from the essence of the soul. The body is separated from it, especially after death. The Sheikh referred to the doctrine of the materialists and rejected it, and told about them what reads, most people and many theologians thought that man is this body, and everyone refers to it by saying, I. This is a corrupt assumption. 19. As for the doctrine that Ibn Sina supports, it is that the body is different from the soul, and the soul is a spiritual essence that overflowed into this form and revived it, and used it as a tool for acquiring knowledge and sciences, until he perfected his essence with them, and became aware of his Lord, aware of the truths of his information, and thus prepared to return to his presence, and become a king of God, his angels, in endless happiness. This is in agreement with the opinion of the Sheikh in his famous poem Al-Ainia, in which he says, why was it brought down from a high place, exalted to the lowest perigee moon? If God sent her for wisdom, I have overlooked the most intelligent and intelligent person. Its landing, if it was a blow, would be inevitable. To hear what you did not hear. And she returns knowing everything hidden in the worlds, its hole has not been patched. The main Sheikh has three proofs of the essence of the soul. The first, if you contemplate yourself, you will see that today you are the same person who has been there all your life. So you are constant and continuous, there is no doubt about that. The second, if a person is interested in a matter, he brings himself to mind, to the point that he says, I did this or that, and in such a situation he is unaware of all parts of his body, as the person's self is different from the body. The third, a person says, I perceived with my sight, took my hand, and walked with my feet. So we necessarily know that there is something unifying in man that brings together these perceptions and these actions. The Sheikh mentioned in Al-Shifa another proof of the essence of the soul known as the Birdman proof, in which he states that if we imagine a person flying in the air, not dependent on the ground, then he only feels himself. On the basis of this proof, Descartes relied in proving the essence of the soul by looking at thought only, in his saying, I think, so I exist. Man is this ego that each of us feels, and whose actions emanate from it. From this angle, when a person feels himself, managing himself, he is free to choose the path of good or evil, responsible for his actions, rewarded or punished for them. All philosophers believe in human freedom. This Abu Nasr al-Farabi searches for happiness and how a person achieves it. Because it is the demand of everyone, and the goal that all people aspire to, and there is no goal behind it. People differ in their beliefs about happiness. Some of them believe it is wealth, others believe it is dominance and power, and so on. But no matter what the person seeking happiness is, his actions that he performs to achieve it must be voluntary, and by choice. A true person with this name must choose the beautiful in everything he does, and throughout his entire life. The naughty person is the one who commits ugly acts voluntarily. But a person's actions cannot arise from thought and vision continuously. Rather, he must become accustomed to them until he becomes accustomed to them and they become an established character in him. Morals arise from habit, and the evidence for this is what we see happening in cities. The people of politics make the people of cities good by accustoming them to good deeds. 20. Al-Farabi described these actions that policymakers, i.e. rulers, should accustom the people to. It is health, moderation in food and drink, and other virtues such as courage, honesty, thrift, chastity, and so on. Then, some of the human actions that cause him blame are praiseworthy or blameworthy, and these actions are either material or physical, such as standing, sitting, riding, looking, and hearing. Or symptoms of the soul, such as lust, pleasure, joy, anger, fear, longing, compassion, jealousy, and the like. Or actions that arise from discrimination in the mind. The person who submits to his desires and follows his own desires is the one who goes astray, is miserable, and does evil, and is not free because he is a slave to these desires. As for the one who had the quality of vision, and the strength of determination to do what the vision required, that is the one whom we are accustomed to call free, with a general term. Whoever does not have these two, it is our custom Ibn Rushd looked at this issue, meaning human freedom, responsibility, and the necessity of engaging in deeds, in order to achieve development and raise the status of the nation from another angle, which is the angle of God's relationship with man, and the connection of actions to necessary causes and causes. The Mutazilites affirmed the freedom of man, and that he is the true agent of what comes from him, while the people of algebra held that man has no control over anything, but is like the leaves of trees moved by the wind. The Ash'aris took the middle and said that God is the creator of all his actions, including disbelief and faith, and that man is the earner of his actions when God Almighty decrees them, which is the well-known theory of earning. But Ibn Rushd criticizes this theory, and declares that he cannot understand them because of their contradiction. Then he declares that everything in this world is necessarily linked to material causes and effects, and that God Almighty created the world with this order and order for his wisdom, and whoever denies the good workmanship of the world and its system and mastery, he denied wisdom, and whoever denied man's freedom to choose his actions, he nullified the wisdom of obligation, reward, and punishment. Until he said, also, if a person does not have any acquisition, then the command to prepare for the expected evils is meaningless. The same applies to the command to attract good deeds, so all crafts that are intended to bring good deeds, such as farming and other crafts, are also invalidated. Likewise, all crafts that are intended to preserve and advance civilization are invalidated, such as the war industry, navigation, medicine, etc. This is all beyond what a person can understand. 22. It is worth contemplating these words that Ibn Rushd announces in our present era, after we have been stagnation, and dependency for a long time, while the Europe that translated these words adopted it. That is, it adopted the rational tendency that believes in the connection between causes and necessary causes that a person must strive to know and act according to. The Averroist philosophy was the reason for the renaissance of Europe, and the thinking of Ibn Rushd and the challenge to his philosophy was the reason for the backwardness of the East. Let us take a step back in our story to the main sheikh to tell his opinion about the happiness that a person should achieve, which is the ultimate goal. Human happiness is not in this worldly life, but rather it is the happiness of the soul after leaving the body. We have seen how he proved the essence of the soul, its difference from the body, and its survival after its annihilation. He does not call the demands a person achieves in this world happiness, but rather pleasure. Either for sensual pleasure if it satisfies the desires of the body, or for moral pleasure, such as the pleasure of nailing a nail when angry, or the pleasure experienced when listening to music. The pleasure of rational life is more honorable than lustful and angry pleasures, and mental pleasure is not fully achieved except when the rational soul in man becomes a rational world. Imprinted within it is the image of the whole, the reasonable order in the whole, and the abundant goodness in the whole. This is something that can only be achieved by pure knowers, if they are removed from the temptations of physical comparison, free from concerns, and find themselves in the world of sanctity and happiness, and attain the highest perfection, and attain the highest pleasure, as he says in Al-Isharat. This is a Sufi tendency that distances a person from the life of this world and separates him from it to the afterlife. This tendency is contrary to the teachings of Islam that God has established in his mighty book, where the Almighty says, "And seek abode in what God has given you hereafter, and do not forget your portion of this world, and do good as God has done good to you, and do not seek corruption on earth. Indeed, God does not like corrupters." Al-Qasas, 77. Al-Qasas, 77. A. This is the story of Islamic philosophy, which began with supporting science, acknowledging reason, and considering how man interprets the truths of the universe and its deep secrets, and how, after he is guided to the laws, he applies them to life, to achieve happiness and achieve what he wants to be. It ended with turning away from the sciences, and being content with what the leading Islamic thinkers had reached, memorizing what they had proven in the depths of their books, without having an independent view that followed progress and development. So the curtain came down on the last chapter of the novel of philosophy, and the death penalty of reprehensible fanaticism and extreme ignorance had fallen. We hope that a new story will be written for Arab philosophy after it was resurrected by the Great Revolution in our Arab society. The story of this new philosophy will be the story of the philosophy of the revolution. Footnotes 1. Isharat, by Ibn Sina, Volume 1, page 185. 2. From the book, Controversy, a manuscript prepared for publication, and will be published soon. 3. The previous reference. For Al-Kindi's letter to Al-Mutazim Billah, page 141. 5. The opinions of the people of the virtuous city, page 42. 6. Divinities, page 359. 7. Post-natural summary, page 124. 8. Previous reference, page 135. 9. Previous reference, page 141. 10. Opinions of the people of the Utopia, page 38. 11. Previous, page 44. 12. Divinities, page 406. 13. The Bride's Letter, published by Professor Quint in Al-Kitab magazine, the special issue of Ibn Sina, April 1952. 14. Post-natural summary, page 156. 15. Previous reference, page 157. 16. Article chapter, page 12. 17. See the translation of the book, The Soul, by Aristotle, 2nd edition, translated by Father Karnawati and Ahmed Fouad Al-Ahwani. 18. Opinions of the people of the Utopia, page 96. 19. A treatise on knowing the rational soul, published in the book, The Conditions of the Soul, by Ibn Sina, page 183. I have translated this message into the English language in my book Islamic Philosophy. 20. Alert for Happiness, page 8. 21. Al-Tabib, page 17. 22. Revealing the Methods of Evidence by Ibn Rushd, page 106.